I never imagined my quiet little street would turn into a battleground. That was before Karen's daughter set her sights on my property. It began one bright afternoon while I was in the garden, humming along to my favorite songs, totally unaware of the trouble heading my way. Without warning, a bright pink sports car skidded into my driveway. Out stepped Karen's daughter, chin up, wearing that look that says she thinks the world revolves around her. "I'm moving into your guest house," she announced as if she'd simply RSVP'd to a party. I nearly dropped my pruning shears. I blinked and managed, "Excuse me?" She didn't even blink. Instead, she brandished her phone like evidence, scrolling to HOA rules she swore proved her point. "According to the HOA," she said, voice honeyed with certainty, "secondary dwellings are considered shared, so that guest house is mine." A cold knot formed in my stomach. Months of work, sanding, painting, furnishing had turned that little building into my refuge, my place to unwind. The idea of her with that entitled smirk taking it over was infuriating. She didn't back down. She started calling the HOA and rattling off clauses, quoting obscure lines with the smugness of someone who thinks rules are tools to wield, not guidelines to follow. I'd long known Karen and her daughter had entitlement in their veins, but this felt different, like an attempt to exert power, to make me feel small in my own yard. I tried to be reasonable. "You're mistaken," I told her. "That guest house is on my property. You have no right to stay there." She smiled that infuriating smile and replied, "We'll see what the HOA says." And just like that, a lazy afternoon changed into a standoff neither of us intended to surrender. For days she camped on the lawn, leaning against a folding chair, her phone glued to her hand as she consulted her mother and texted neighbors, messages that were part threat, part condescension. Every knock at the door made my heart skip. Every attempt to go about my day was interrupted by the presence of someone treating my property as if it were public ground. I realized this wasn't a petty hiccup. It was a coup in slow motion. If I didn't act, it wouldn't stop at annoyance. So I started assembling my case, photographs of the lot lines, timestamps on renovation receipts, logs of her calls and texts, anything to prove ownership and document harassment. By week's end, the lines were drawn and I had a plan. A plan designed to teach her a lesson about entitlement, HOA rules, and the consequences of trying to bully a neighbor. The next morning, I woke determined. She was already parading across my driveway, phone to her ear, plotting with her mother, no doubt. I sat with my coffee, outwardly calm, while my head buzzed with strategy. This was no longer just about a tiny guest house. It was about principle, protecting what's mine from people who try to bend rules to suit their whims. I decided to pull the HOA into the middle of it properly. I called them first, explained the situation in a measured tone, and walked them through the evidence I'd gathered. Photos, saved messages, even recordings of her boldly claiming the right to occupy the space. The representative was professional and asked clarifying questions, typing notes as I spoke. Their voice carried the kind of weary patience of someone who'd handled entitlement before. "We'll send an inspector to verify property boundaries and usage," they assured me. "It sounds like there may be a misunderstanding of the rules." I hung up with a cautious sense of relief. But I knew the real problem was the girl in my driveway. She'd already begun to rally neighborhood sympathy, hinting at a loophole she insisted would force me out. I watched her from my kitchen window, pacing, posturing, like she'd already taken possession. Every nerve in me said, don't let her pull this off. Later that day, the HOA inspector arrived. I led them across the property, pointing out everything that tied the guest house to my deed. The connecting pathways, utility hookups, the measured lot line on the survey. Karen's daughter attempted to interrupt, waving her phone and repeating her script, but the inspector held up a hand and said politely, "We need to verify the facts first. Claims don't override ownership." Her face fell in that instant, and I allowed myself a small, quiet victory, knowing this was only the start. In the days that followed, the conflict escalated. She posted thinly veiled pleas for support in the neighborhood group. Karen called repeatedly, leaving voicemails full of accusations and veiled threats. I documented every interaction and refused to be baited into a petty war of words. The HOA continued their work, and slowly the balance tipped in my favor. Then the decision came. The HOA concluded Karen's daughter had no legal claim to the guest house. It was officially mine, my property, my rules. Relief washed over me like cool water. That ruling felt like validation, proof that boundaries mattered and that entitlement could be checked. I pictured the look on her face when she realized her plan had failed. But I didn't stop at relief. I knew a declaration on paper wouldn't necessarily stop her from trying again. Entitlement, I've learned, doesn't die easily. Sometimes a ruling only fans the flames. Her frustration simmered, and I could feel it. I needed a final move that wouldn't merely win the argument on paper, but would make her think twice before ever attempting something like this again. So I began with subtle measures. I changed the locks on the guest house and set up a small security system that pinged me anytime there was movement nearby. On the door, I taped a polite but firm sign, "Private property. Unauthorized entry prohibited." It was a simple step, but the message was unmistakable. This space was mine, and the boundaries were non-negotiable. The moment Karen's daughter saw the new locks, her expression twisted into outrage. She pounded on the door and shouted about rights and HOA loopholes, but I stayed inside, calm and quiet, recording every second. Her mother soon called, her voice sharp with anger, ordering me to undo the changes. I answered evenly, "This is my property." The HOA agrees. There's nothing more to discuss. Within days, I noticed a shift. She started avoiding the guest house entirely. The stream of texts she sent became less confident, more frantic. Her attempts to turn neighbors against me fell flat, ignored by people who were tired of her theatrics. With every failed move, her bravado cracked a little more. I finally had the advantage. But I wasn't done. I wanted to ensure her entitlement could never threaten my home again. That's when I staged the guest house as if it already had a tenant. I set furniture, arranged decor, and left small signs of occupancy. A jacket draped on a chair, groceries in the fridge. A neighbor helped me spread the word casually. The unit was now under contract, and anyone trespassing would face eviction immediately. When Karen's daughter caught sight of it, she stormed over, livid, demanding to know who was inside. I smiled, held up my HOA paperwork, and said simply, "It's occupied. Respect private property." For the first time, her outrage gave way to fear. She understood she was boxed in. The fight she thought she could win had collapsed around her, and she had no more cards to play. By week's end, she was gone. No visits, no calls, no threats. I had flipped the script, without rage, just with careful preparation, patience, and a sharp strategy. The guest house was safe, my peace restored. Still, I had one final step to take, the move that would end this saga once and for all. After weeks of maneuvering, documenting, and holding my ground, it was time for her to face real consequences. The HOA scheduled a routine visit to finalize the occupancy status and confirm everything was secure. Even though Karen's daughter had been told she had no claim, she showed up anyway, storming across my lawn, arms folded, eyes blazing. She expected me to argue, maybe to back down, but instead I stayed composed and ready. The inspector arrived, clipboard in hand. I explained calmly that the guest house was fully occupied and presented my meticulously organized evidence, photographs, documents, HOA approvals. Karen's daughter tried to argue, but the inspector shut her down with a firm tone. "Her presence here is unauthorized. This property is not hers." Then came the moment I had waited for. The inspector handed her a formal notice. If she attempted to enter again, she could be fined or even face legal action for trespassing. Her protests rang hollow against the inspector's clear ruling. The rules she'd tried to twist had backfired completely. Her face drained of color, and I saw it. The moment she realized her entitlement had no more ground to stand on. She spun around and left in fury, but I didn't need to escort her out. The locks, the staged tenant, the documentation, and the HOA's support had already secured my victory. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tension lift. Not because I'd humiliated her, but because I had finally reclaimed my peace. She didn't return. Karen sent a few desperate texts, but I ignored them. The guest house remained untouched. A quiet reminder that entitlement ends where firm boundaries begin. Slowly, the neighborhood returned to its normal rhythm. free from drama, and in that quiet, I realized something important. Winning doesn't always come from yelling the loudest or fighting the hardest. Sometimes it comes from patience, careful planning, and refusing to bend. By standing firm and staying strategic, I had shown that entitlement couldn't bulldoze its way through real boundaries. The guest house was once again my sanctuary. The lesson was clear: respect property lines, or be evicted not just from a house, but from the illusion of control itself. Peace had returned, and this time I knew it would last. Wow, what a ride. If you enjoyed seeing Karen's daughter face her downfall, don't forget to hit that like button. And for more outrageous HOA stories and jaw-dropping neighbor drama, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. I want to hear from you too. What part of this story shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts down in the comments.